All right, so yesterday we talked about how slaves were being brought to South Carolina. Today we're going to talk about what was done to control the slaves and some of the things that happened when the control of them failed. Beginning around 1700, the General Assembly, the group that's over control of South Carolina, officially started passing laws because they were afraid that there were too many slaves in our state. However, greed and profit continued to drive the way of thinking. Yes, we were afraid that there may be slave rebellions, but South Carolina was so greedy that they were like, got to keep the slaves coming anyway. On September 9th, 1739, the planner's worst fears comes true. It's realized when there's a slave named Jemmy. Jemmy met with 20 other slaves south of Charlestown near a place called the Stono River. That's why this is called the Stono Rebellion. They planned to escape to St. Augustine, which is in Spanish Florida. Spanish had promised any slave that escaped there would be guaranteed their freedom. So if you could escape to St. Augustine, you're free. Now just so you guys know, that is a long, long way. And they're meeting near Charlestown. That's in the middle of South Carolina. They've got to run all the way down the coast to St. Augustine. So just to give you guys a little view of what that's going to be like, they've got to run from Charlestown right there, all the way to St. Augustine, Florida, right there. So that's a long, long, long way. Just so you guys can see it better, let's see, length of my finger from this knuckle to the tip is about 100 miles. So that's 100, 200. It's going to be about 225 miles for them to run all that way. See if we can get you guys set back up so you can. All right. So that's a long way to run. They broke into a store and they killed the shopkeeper, stealing the weapons. The escaped slaves then start using drums to signal other slaves to join in the rebellion. And they begin moving towards Beaufort, stopping at every plantation along the way, killing the whites and urging other slaves to join them. A lot of slaves refuse to because they know the punishment's going to be bad. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, this group of escaped slaves run across the Lieutenant Governor, William Bull. They fire at him, but they're not used to using guns, and he gets away. He is able to call out the local militias, and they meet the slaves on the road, killing almost all of them. 60 additional slaves are executed in the following weeks just for knowing about what's going on. Following the Stono Rebellion, the Assembly enacts a set of laws called the Negro Act of 1740, also known as the Slave Codes. So either one's technically correct. This strengthened the slave code that South Carolina already had, which was brought from Barbados. This new code prohibited the travel of slaves without a pass. Slaves were not allowed to gather without a white person present. They were not allowed to learn how to read or write anymore. They were not allowed to carry weapons. Also, part of a law that was going into place, which actually would have gone into effect right before the slave code, said that whites had to carry guns to church, which is why the Stono Rebellion happened on a Sunday. White people were in church. It was before the law went into effect. White people didn't carry guns to church before the law. So that's why they did it on a Sunday. Also, slaves didn't have to work on Sundays. This new set of slave codes controlled every aspect of their lives, including the way they dressed. They weren't allowed to get married, which is why a lot of black weddings have people jumping the broom. It's an African-American tradition that comes from this time. But the Negro Act also set up fines for slave owners. If you were too cruel to your slaves, you had to pay a fine, but these slave owners were so rich they didn't care. Even after the rebellion, the desire for profit was enough to keep the slave trade going, unregulated, except for a tariff. Tariff is a vocabulary word. Tariff simply means a tax. It's placed on imported slaves. The Negro Act didn't just affect slaves and slave owners, though. It also set up laws to regulate free Africans. Even though South Carolina had fewer free blacks than most other colonies, some African Americans were freed when their masters died, although that was very, very rare. Most slaves did gain their freedom by being able to buy it. They could work extra hours to go get odd jobs. Some slaves possessed skills that allowed them to earn the money, like carpentry, blacksmithing, things like that. But if you bought your freedom, you had to leave South Carolina within 6 months, and you were never allowed to come back. If you did stay here after that 6 months, or if you did come back, you would be re-enslaved and sold at auction. Most slaves didn't want to leave because they'd have to leave their families behind. In addition, all free black people had to carry with them a manumission. Manumission is a letter from the state or from the courts saying that you are free. It proved that you were free. So if you were caught without the manumission, you're in trouble. Only 4% of South Carolina's black population was actually free, and most of them lived in cities, and they had talents like blacksmithing and carpentry, so they were able to make a living. All right, this is your last lesson for this group, or for this set of virtual lessons. Make sure you got all of your lessons done. Make sure you got all your work done before you come back to school. We'll see you guys when you get back.